Captain Jake Morrison stood against the cold crystal wall and watched the grand hall fill with beings from across the known galaxy. The banquet chamber of the crystal spire stretched higher than any human building, and the walls sparkled with embedded lights that pulsed like living stars. Elven nobles entered, wearing robes that shimmered with colors Jake had no names for, and their pointed ears were decorated with jewels that hummed with quiet. Power Dragon, kin in their smaller humanoid forms, moved through the crowd with ancient grace, while their larger cousins, perched on the galleries far above, in their golden eyes, watched everything below. Jake wore his dress uniform from the human fleet, but the dark blue fabric looked plain and crude. Next to the elder races and their centuries of refined culture, his team stood nearby along the wall with the other observers. Lieutenant Maya Brooks was a tactical officer who had served with Jake through 3 major battles, and her brown eyes now scanned the room for threats out of habit. Lieutenant Kara Winters stood beside her, and the combat specialist kept one hand near her concealed sidearm despite the peace treaty that had been signed. 6 months ago, 3 other human delegates completed their small group, but none of them had been offered seats at the golden tables that filled the center of the hall. The message was clear enough: humans were tolerated here but not welcomed, and certainly not respected. An elven lord walked past them, and his nose wrinkled as if he smelled something unpleasant, and Jake forced himself to remain still and calm. The frontier wars had ended without a clear victor, but everyone knew humanity had been on the losing side when the ceasefire was declared. Human colonies had been burning, and their fleets were scattered, and only a few key victories had prevented complete destruction. Elder races had agreed to peace not because they respected humanity, but because continuing the war would have cost them resources they preferred to spend elsewhere. Jake understood this, and it burned in his chest like hot coal, but he kept his face neutral. Gong sounded, and the crowd fell silent. The High Archon entered first, and Lord Velrin Starweaver was tall, even for an elf, with silver hair that fell past his shoulders and robes that gleamed like liquid metal. He took his seat at the center of the high table, and other elven nobles arranged themselves according to rank and ancient protocols. Human delegates remained standing against the walls. Then she entered, and the entire atmosphere of the hall changed. Princess Lyra Silverwind walked through the main archway, and beside her moved the most terrifying and beautiful creature Jake had ever seen: the dragon. Ashenclaw was massive even in his walking form, and his scales were black, but not like normal black. They were the black of deep space, where no stars shine, and they seemed to absorb all light that touched them. The dragon moved with impossible grace, and his claws clicked softly on the crystal floor. Princess Lyra herself was striking in ways that made Jake forget to breathe. She was tall and slender, with silver hair that seemed to float around her shoulders as if she walked underwater. Her skin was pale as moonlight, and her eyes were violet and so bright they almost glowed. But what shocked Jake most was that she wore armor instead of formal robes. Plates were sleek and dark, and they looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. At the same time, she carried no visible weapon, but Jake had heard the stories about her, and he knew she was perhaps the deadliest warrior in the elven fleet. Every being in the hall watched her walk, and Jake noticed the elven lords shift uncomfortably in their seats. Princess Lyra had a reputation for doing the unexpected, and her presence here was already causing tension. She walked past the high table without stopping. She walked past the nobles and diplomats who tried to catch her attention. Walked directly toward Jake. His heart started pounding hard enough that he worried everyone could hear it. Maya grabbed his arm and whispered that something was wrong, and this had to be a trap of some kind. The dragon Ashenclaw followed Princess Lyra, and his golden eyes with their vertical slits focused entirely on Jake with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Princess Lyra stopped directly in front of him. The hall went completely silent, and even the musicians in the corner stopped playing. She extended her hand toward Jake, and her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber without needing to shout. There are no empty seats at this banquet, Captain Morrison. She paused, and her violet eyes locked onto his butt. There will be one beside me, if you will take it. Jake stared at her outstretched hand behind Princess Lyra. He could see Lord Velrin rising from his seat, and the High Archon's face had gone dark with anger. Elven nobles stood as well, and their expressions ranged from shock too outraged to something that looked like fear. Maya was still gripping Jake's arm. It's hard enough to hurt, and she hissed that he should refuse and that this was clearly some kind of political game. He did not understand. But Jake looked into Princess Lyra's eyes and saw something there that surprised him. It was not mockery or cruelty. It was desperation mixed with determination and maybe even hope. The dragon, a Shanclaw, made a low sound that was not quite a growl, and Jake felt something impossible happen. A voice touched his mind, and it was ancient and heavy and sad all at once. Finally, someone worthy of truth, young human. Da. Words echoed in his skull, and Jake knew somehow that this was real and that the dragon had actually spoken to him telepathically. Made his decision, Jake took Princess Lyra's hand, and her skin was cool and impossibly smooth, like touching polished stone. She led him forward through the crowd, and people moved aside quickly, and some of them looked horrified while others looked fascinated. Dashkull followed close behind, and the dragon's presence felt like walking in the shadow of a storm cloud. An elven noble tried to block their path, and he was young with elaborate robes that marked him as someone important. He opened his mouth to protest, but Ashenclaw growled, and the sound was deep enough to vibrate in Jake's chest. The young noble stumbled backward and nearly fell. Princess Lyra led Jake to the high table, and she seated him in the chair directly beside hers, at the very center, where only royalty and legendary heroes were supposed to sit. Lord Velrin slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the crystal goblets jump. You dishonor your bloodline nieces. Voice shook with rage. You mock this council by seating a human barbarian among us as if he were our equal. Princess Lyra met her uncle's gaze without any sign of fear. I seat beside me someone who deserves truth, uncle. She spoke clearly so everyone could hear. That is something this council has long forgotten how to provide. The High Archon opened his mouth to respond, but Princess Lyra sat down gracefully, and Jake quickly followed her example. Shanclaw coiled himself behind their chairs like a living wall of shadow, and his presence made it clear that anyone who approached would do so at their own risk. The feast began because the protocols demanded it. But the tension in the hall was thick enough to cut. Servants brought dishes of exotic foods and drinks from dozens of worlds, but Jake could barely taste any of it. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his goblet, and he noticed Princess Lyra watching him with those unsettling violet eyes. She leaned close and spoke quietly so only he could hear. Captain Morrison, your grandmother was Dr. Lisa Morrison, was she not? Jake nodded slowly and set down his goblet. She died 30 years ago in a shuttle accident when he was just a boy. Princess Lyra's expression was sad, and knowing there are no accidents, Captain Shea paused. Only buried truths, and your grandmother discovered something that powerful people wanted hidden forever. Jake stared at Princess Lyra and tried to process what she had just said about his grandmother before he could ask anything. A woman in dark robes approached their table and moved with the silent grace of a shadow. Lady Claire Nightshade was known, even among humans, as Princess Lyra's most trusted advisor and her closest friend. She had fought beside the princess in a dozen battles, and rumors said she knew secrets that could topple kingdoms. Claire placed a small crystal on the table between Jake and Princess Lyra, and the object glowed faintly with inner light. This contains footage from 300 years ago, from the first contact war between humans and the elder races. Claire spoke quietly, but her words hit Jake like a physical blow. Your histories claim humans fired first and started a war they could barely survive. She glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. That is a lie, and this crystal proves that. Jake picked up the crystal, and it was warm in his palm. Why give this to me, and why now? Princess Lyra placed her hand over his, and her violet eyes were intense. Because my dragon remembers everything. Captain Shea gestured to Ashenclaw, who loomed behind them like a mountain of living shadow. Dragons live for thousands of years, and they never forget. Shanclaw shifted, and Jake felt the dragon's presence in his mind. Igana, was there a young human when your people first entered our space? The dragon's mental voice carried weight of centuries. I was bonded to Princess Lyra's great-grandmother, who commanded the elven fleet. Jake's mouth went dry. What happened, Princess? Lyra took a deep breath. Human research vessel discovered a derelict elven dreadnought floating in dead space. She spoke each word carefully, as if They hurt sure scientists went aboard and found evidence of experiments. Her face darkened experiments using captured human colonists in attempts to weaponize human genetics to create biological weapons. Jake felt sick. The room seemed to spin around. Himyur scientists tried to report this war crime to our council, Princess Lyra continued. They sent messages asking for an investigation and offering peace. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. My great-grandmother received orders from this very council to destroy that research ship and kill everyone aboard. She paused and Sheober-Dashenclaw's mental voice touched Jake Aguni. Have carried the guilt for 300 years. Little human, the dragon sounded ancient and tired. We murdered innocents too. Hide a crime and then we blamed your people for the war that followed. Jake looked down at the crystal in his hand. My grandmother, Princess Lyra, nodded. She was a geneticist, and she found fragments of the original research your grandmother discovered. That the biological experiments never stopped. They continued in secret all through the war, and even after the ceasefire. Jake's hands were shaking now. That is why she died. Princess Lyra met his eyes. That is why someone made certain she died. Captain around them the banquet continued, but Jake felt like he was watching it from very far away. Elven nobles laughed and drank and celebrated their superiority. While sitting on a foundation of lies and murder, Lord Velrin sat at the head of the table looking smug and powerful. Jake suddenly wondered if the High Archon knew, and if he had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Princess Lyra seemed to read his thoughts. My uncle gave the orders, Captain. Her voice was hard. He was a junior officer 300 years ago, but he helped plan the cover-ups. Looked at Lord Velrin with barely concealed hatred. Has spent centuries climbing to power while making certain the truth stayed. Jake wanted to stand up and shout the truth to everyone in the hall, but Princess Lyra's hand tightened on his. Not yet, Captain. Shay whispered urgently. If you reveal this now, they will simply kill us both and claim we were conspirators or mad. We need proof that cannot be denied, and we need allies who will stand with you. Jake forced himself to stay seated. What do you need from me, Princess? Lyra smiled, but it was a sad expression. Your grandmother's research is encoded in a way that only her direct descendants can unlock. She explained it as hidden in genetic markers that she wrote into her own DNA before she died. Jake understood. Then you need my DNA to unlock her final research, Princess. Lyra nodded. And I need you alive to testify when we expose this conspiracy to the entire galaxy. Commotion at the far end of the hall interrupted them. Someone screamed. Jake turned and saw smoke pouring from one of the upper galleries. Then the first explosion hit the western wall of the crystal hall, shattered, and sent fragments flying like deadly rain. Jake was thrown from his chair, but something massive covered Heimashankla had moved faster than thought and thrown his armored body over both Jake and Princess Lyra. The dragon's scales absorbed the blast and protected them from the worst of it. Fire spread across the ancient tapestries and screams filled the air through the smoke. Jake saw figures dropping from the shattered ceiling. They wore black armor with no markings, but their weapons were definitely elven design assassins. One landed near the high table and raised an energy blade that glowed with lethal Lidishan claws. Claw lashed out faster than a striking snake and crushed the assassin before the blade could fall. Princess Lyra was already on her feet, and she held a sword that seemed to materialize from nothing. The blade glowed with the same violet light as her eyes. She moved like water and cut down 2 more assassins in the space of a heartbeat. Palace guards rushed in, but more explosions rocked the hall. Jake grabbed a fallen weapon and rolled to his feet. Maya and his team were fighting their way toward him through the chaos. Kara shot an assassin who tried to ambush them from behind. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, and Jake saw both humans and elves among the dead. Lord Velrin was shouting orders, but Jake noticed something strange. The High Archon's personal guards seemed slow to respond, and they moved as if they had expected this attack. We're not surprised enough. Princess Lyra grabbed Jake's arm hard. We must leave now. Captain, her eyes were wild. This attack is aimed at you, and if we stay here, we both Kinkla spread his massive wings and knocked aside debris and attackers with equal ease. Dragon was bleeding from several wounds, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Jake's team reached them, and Maya had blood running down her face from a cut above her eye where "Do we go?" Princess Lyra pointed to a side exit that most people did not seem to know about. "My dragon will carry us, but we must move." Now they ran behind them. The crystal spire burned, and Jake heard more explosions. Someone was making absolutely certain that this attack would be devastating. They burst out into the cool night air, and Ashenclaw shifted. His body expanded and grew until he was his full dragon size. The transformation was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. Princess Lyra pulled Jake onto the dragon's back, and the scales felt warm and strangely soft under his hands. Maya and the rest of the team climbed up behind him. "Hold on, Captain Morrison." Princess Lyra looked back at him, and her silver hair whipped in the wind. "Everything you thought you knew about the war." As Ashenclaw launched into the sky with powerful beats of his massive wings below them, the crystal spire collapsed and flames rose high into the night. Ships were already scrambling, and Jake could see elven fighters taking off in pursuit. Princess Lyra turned to face him. "Fully, your grandmother found evidence of a crime that spans 3 centuries. Captain, she had to shout over the wind. That same conspiracy now threatens every human world in the galaxy." Jake held on tight as Ashenclaw climbed higher. "Why me, though? And why now?" Princess Lyra smiled grimly. "Because you carry your grandmother's DNA. And that makes you the key to unlocking everything." She pointed ahead to where mountains rose dark against the star's end. "Because time has run out. Conspirators are moving to their final phase, and if we do not stop them in the next 2 days, millions of humans will." Ashenclaw roared, and the sound echoed across the sky like thunder. Jake looked back at his team, and Maya's face showed grim determination. Despite her injury, Kara was checking her weapons and preparing for whatever came next. It was supposed to be a peace banquet, but instead it had become the beginning of something far more dangerous. Jake touched the crystal in his pocket and felt its warmth. His grandmother had died to protect this truth. Now he would have to risk everything to bring it into the light. Ashenclaw flew through the night sky with powerful beats of his massive wings, and below them the elven homeworld of Silver Peak stretched out in darkness, broken by clusters of glowing cities. Jake held tight to the dragon's scales and tried not to think about how high they were flying. Princess Lyra sat in front of him with perfect balance, and she seemed completely at ease, despite the wind that threatened to tear them from the dragon's back. Behind Jake, his team huddled together, and Maya pressed a cloth to the cut on her forehead while Kara kept watching the sky for pursuit. "We have maybe 20 minutes before their fighters catch up to us." Princess Lyra spoke without turning around, and her voice somehow carried clearly over the wind. "There's a place in the mountains where we can hide and plan our next move." Jake wanted to ask 100 questions, but he forced himself to focus on the most important one. "You said millions of humans will die in 2 days, and what is happening?" Princess Lyra was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with anger. "Conspiracy is called the Memory Keepers, and they are composed of elder race supremacists who believe humanity should never be allowed to rise to equal standing with the ancient civilizations." She gestured to the landscape below. "They have worked for 300 years to keep your people suppressed and weak." Jake felt cold. "That had nothing to do with the wind, the war." Princess Lyra nodded. "They orchestrated it, and they sabotaged human colonies, and they ensured that every time humanity seemed ready to advance, something would set you back." She turned to look at him, and her violet eyes reflected starlight. "But humans are resilient, Captain, and you adapt faster than any race the galaxy has ever seen. That terrifies the memory keeper." Ashenclaw's mental voice touched Jake's mind again. "Your people evolve and learn and grow at a pace that seems impossible to beings who measure progress in centuries." The dragon sounded almost admiring. "In just 300 years you have gone from primitive spacecraft to technology that rivals ours. Is extraordinary and dangerous to those who wish to maintain the old order." Jake absorbed this. "What is their plan now?" Princess Lyra's expression darkened. "They call it the final cleansing, but it is not meant to kill all humans." Her voice was bitter. "That would be too obvious and would unite the galaxy against them. Instead, they have created a biological agent that will genetically limit human cognitive development." Jake felt sick again. "They want to make us stupid." "Not stupid exactly," Princess Lyra corrected, "but limited and unable to innovate or adapt as quickly as you do naturally." She looked ahead to where mountains loomed. "They will release this agent on every major Human world disguised as medical supplies and humanitarian aid. Once it spreads through your population within a generation, humanity will be permanently reduced to a subservient role, Maya spoke up from behind. Then how do we stop it? Princess Lyra pointed to the mountains ahead there. It's a hidden facility in those peaks where the memory keepers coordinate their operations, she explained. We need to break in and access their communication systems. If we can broadcast the truth to the entire galaxy, along with proof of their conspiracy, we can stop them. Jake understood the problem immediately. They will have shut down the shipments by then. The bioweapon will already be deployed. Princess Lyra shook her head. There is a fail-safe. Your grandmother discovered it and encoded the information in her genetic research. She looked back at him. The bioweapon requires 2 genetic keys to activate, and 1 key is from the Elven royal bloodline. She touched her chest. The other key is from the Morrison family. Lynn. Jake stared at her in shock. They needed my grandmother exactly, Princess Lyra confirmed. She refused to help them, and that is why they killed her. But they kept her genetic information, and they have been waiting for the right moment. She paused. Now they plan to extract what they need from you by force. That is what the assassination attempt was about. To kill you, but to capture you. A Shenclaw suddenly dove, and Jake's stomach lurched behind them. Bright streaks of light cut through the darkness. Selvan fighters. The dragon twisted through the air, and energy beams missed them by meters. Hold on, Princess Lyra shouted to Shenclaw. Rolled and dove between mountain peaks, and the fighters followed. One got too close, and the dragon's tail lashed out. The impact sent the fighter spinning into a cliff face, where it exploded in a ball of fire. 2 more fighters came at them from different angles, and Ashenclaw banked hard. Energy beams scorched his scales, and the dragon roared in pain and fury. Princess Lyra stood up on Ashenclaw's back. Jake was amazed she could keep her balance. She raised one hand, and violet light erupted from her palm. The energy blast hit one fighter and sent it tumbling from the sky. The second fighter pulled back and called for reinforcements. Ankle dove into a narrow canyon, and his wings barely fit between the stone walls. Dragon flew with impossible precision and turned and twisted through the canyon while the fighters struggled. 2 follow. One crashed into the canyon, while another pulled up and gave up the chase. They burst out of the canyon, and a Shenclaw climbed toward a mountain peak. Their princess Lyra pointed to what looked like solid rock. A Shenclaw flew straight at the cliff face, and Jake braced for impact, but the rock shimmered and vanished. It was a hologram behind. It was a massive cave entrance, and Ashenclaw flew inside. The dragon landed heavily, and his breathing was labored. Jake could see scorch marks on his scales, and blood dripping from several wounds. Everyone off. Princess Lyra, commanded Claire, appeared from the shadows of the cave, and Jake had not realized she had escaped the banquet. Separately, she had 3 other elves with her, and all wore combat armor. This is as far as we can go on dragon backgrounds, Lyra explained. The facility is deeper in the mountains and protected by technology that will detect a Shenclaw if he gets too close. The dragon lowered his great head and touched his nose to Princess Lyra's forehead. Be careful, my heart. A Shenclaw's voice in Jake's mind was gentle now. I will heal and be ready when you call, Princess. Lyra stroked the dragon's scales. Rest now, old friend, and we will finish this together. Claire led them deeper into the cave system, through passages that were clearly artificial despite appearing natural. How did you know about this place? Jake asked Princess. Lyra smiled slightly. Have been investigating the memory keepers for 20 years, Captain Shea said. Ever since Ashenclaw shared his memories with me, and I learned the truth about the first contact Wari. I've spent 2 decades gathering evidence and building a network of allies who want the truth exposed. They emerged from the caves onto a mountainside and spread below them was a valley. In the center sat a massive facility that glowed with power. Memory Keeper Headquarters, Princess, Lyra said. Inside that building is everything we need in communication systems that can broadcast to the entire galaxy and evidence of the conspiracy, and most importantly, the control system for the bioweapon shipment. Claire checked her equipment. They will have hundreds of guards and advanced defense systems. She looked at their small group. This is a suicide mission. Jake looked at Maya and Kara, and they both nodded. His other team members looked scared. but determined princess. Lyra drew her glowing sword. Then we make it count. She turned to Jacure. Grandmother died for this truth, Captain, and countless others have suffered. Because of these lies, she met his Izar. You ready to risk everything to set things right? Jake thought about his grandmother, who had died when he was just a boy. He thought about all the humans who had died in a war based on lies. He thought about the millions who would be condemned to a half-life if the Memory Keepers succeeded. He drew the weapon he had taken from the banquet as Jake said simply. Princess Lyra smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Then let us go write some history. The Memory Keeper facility loomed before them like a fortress carved from the mountain itself, and lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that reminded Jake of living nerves. Claire led them down a hidden path that switched back along the cliff face, and the drop on one side was enough to make Jake dizzy. We have one advantage, Princess, Lyra explained. As they moved, they do not know.
Ow.
I have been planning this for 20 years, and they do not know about the access codes I stole from their systems. She pulled out a small device. This will get us through the outer defenses. But once we are inside, we have maybe 15 minutes before they lock down everything. Maya checked her weapon. What is the plan? Princess Lyra pointed to a schematic that appeared on her device. Jake and I go to the central control room, and we need both our genetic signatures to access the bioweapon shutdown system. She indicated another section. Claire and Kara will lead a team to the communication center, and once we have control, you broadcast everything, the evidence and the truth and all of it. Claire nodded grimly, and to the rest of us, we hold the exits and make sure no one stops the broadcast. Princess Lyra looked at Jake's remaining team members. I will not lie to you, and many of us will probably die today. No one back down. They reached the facility's outer wall, and Princess Lyra pressed her device against what looked like solid metal. Wall shimmered, and a doorway appeared. Inside was a corridor that glowed with soft blue light and looked completely empty. Too easy, Kara muttered. They moved quickly through the corridors, and Princess Lyra led them with absolute confidence. Gray realized she must have memorized every detail of this place, from stolen blueprints. Encountered their first guards at an intersection. For elven soldiers in advanced armor turned toward them in surprise. Claire moved first, and her blade flashed. To guards fell before they could raise an alarm. Maya took down the third, and Kara finished the fourth. They dragged the bodies into a side room. The alarm will sound soon, Princess Lyra said. We need to move faster. They ran now through winding corridors that all looked the same to Jake. Twice they had to hide while groups of technicians passed. Finally, they reached a large chamber, and Princess Lyra held up her hand. Beyond this door is where we split up. She looked at Claire. Know what to do? Claire embraced her friend briefly. Do not die today. Lyra and the galaxy needs you. Princess Lyra smiled. I have a dragon waiting for me, and I will not disappoint him. She turned to Jake. Ready? Captain Jake nodded. Even though his heart was pounding, they burst through the door alarms. Immediately began shrieking, and red lights flooded the corridors. Princess Lyra and Jake ran toward the central control room, while the others headed for communications. Guards appeared ahead, and Princess Lyra cut through them like they were nothing. Her sword moved faster than Jake could follow, and bodies fell in their wake. They reached a massive door sealed with multiple locks. Princess Lyra placed her hand on a scanner in green. Highlights swept across her palm. Royal bloodline confirmed, a mechanical voice announced. Second authorization required. Jake stepped forward and placed his hand on another scanner. The device hummed, and blue light traced patterns across his skin. Morrison genetic markers confirmed. The voice said access granted. The door hissed open. Inside was a circular chamber dominated by a huge holographic display that showed the entire galaxy. Red dots marked human worlds, and Jake could see cargo ships approaching, each one the bioweapon shipments. Princess Lyra ran to the central console. We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach distribution centers on each world. Her fingers flew across controls. I need you here, Captain Jake moved beside her, and she indicated to panels. We each place our hands here, and the system reads our genetic codes, and then we can input the shutdown sequence. But before we can do that, we need to download all their files as evidence. Footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. They were coming. Jake stood ready with his weapon while Princess Lyra worked frantically at the console. The door exploded inward. Guards poured in, but Jake and Princess Lyra fought them back. His weapon fire dropped 3 before they could aim. Princess Lyra's blade danced, and more fell. Then a figure walked through the smoke and chaos. Lord Velrin Starweaver stood in the doorway, and his face was twisted. With fury, foolish child, he spoke to Princess Lyra. You have no idea what you are doing. Princess Lyra faced her uncle with her sword raised high.
Know exactly what I am doing, uncle.
And I am ending 3 centuries of lies and murder. Lord Velrin drew his own blade, and it glowed with golden light. Humanity is a plague, he spat. They breed too fast and evolve too quickly and learn too efficiently. If we do not limit them, they will overwhelm everything the elder races have built over millennia. Princess Lyra shook her head. You are afraid, uncle, and afraid that younger races might surpass you. That is not a reason to commit genocide. It is not genocide, Lord Velrin insisted. We are simply ensuring the natural order remains stable. They Fatuncle and Nice, and their blades clashed with sounds like breaking crystal. Lord Velrin was older and more experienced, but Princess Lyra was faster and fought with desperate fury. Jake tried to help, but more guards entered, and he was forced to defend. The console Maya burst through another entrance with Kara, and they helped hold back the tide. The download is complete, Princess Lyra shouted while parrying her uncle's strikes. Jake the panels. Jake turned and placed his hands on the indicated panels. Heat surged through his palms as the system read his genetic code. Princess Lyra kicked her uncle back and lunged to the console. She placed her hands on her panels. Genetic authorization confirmed. The mechanical voice announced shutdown sequence available. Lord Velrin roared and charged forward. A Shanklaw's roar shook the entire facility. The dragon had sensed Princess Lyra's danger. Stone walls exploded inward as the massive dragon forced his way into the building. Lord Velrin turned in shock. A Shanklaw's claw swept the high Arcana aside like he was nothing. The dragon's golden eyes blazed with fury. Gave the order 300 years ago. Enkla's mental voice thundered through everyone's mind. Zoo made me complicit in murder. The dragon's tail smashed through equipment. I have waited centuries for this moment. Betrayer. Lord Velrin scrambled backward. Another dragon burst through the ceiling. It was Solarfung, and Lord Velrin's personal bonded dragon. Golden Beast was massive, and his scales gleamed like the sun. The 2 dragons collided, and their battle shook the mountain. Princess Lyra turned back to the console. Do it now. Jake, her hands flew across the controls and put the shutdown code. Jake followed her instructions and pressed the sequence she called out, warning. The mechanical voice said shutdown requires both genetic keys maintained for 30 seconds. Outside, Ashenclaw and Solarfung tore at each other. Black Dragon's scales absorbed energy attacks while the Golden Dragon's claws left burning trails. Lord Velrin threw a blast of energy at Princess Larushi, raised a shield, but the impact knocked her away from the Consoljik. She screamed, "Hold your position!" Jake kept his hands on the panels even as the building shook around him. 20 seconds. Maya and Kara held the doorway against waves of guards. Claire's voice came over communication. Broadcast is ready, and we are transmitting everything. Entire galaxy is watching. 10 seconds. Lord Velrin charged toward Jake. Princess Lyra tackled her uncle, and they crashed to the floor above them. Ashanclaw screamed as Solarfung's claws found his throat. 5 seconds. The ceiling collapsed. Stone and metal rained down. Ashanclaw pushed Solarfung into the falling debris. Both dragons vanished under tons of rubble. Shut down. Complete, the mechanical voice announced. Princess Lyra looked up from where she pinned her uncle. The holographic display showed the cargo ships stopping across the galaxy. The bioweapon shipments were being recalled. It was over, but the ceiling was still. Felinje grabbed Princess Lyra and pulled her toward the exit. Lord Velrin tried to follow, but a beam fell across him. His scream was cut short. They ran as the facility collapsed behind them. "Where's Ashenclaw?" Princess Lyra shouted. They reached the outside and turned back. The mountain was caving in on itself from the rubble. A massive dark shape struggled upward. A Chanclaw emerged bleeding and broken, but Oliva Solarfung did not follow. The Golden Dragon was buried beneath the mountain. Princess Lyra ran to Ashenclaw and threw her arms around his massive head. The dragon lowered himself to the ground. "It has done, my heart." His mental voice was weak. Truth is known, and the weapon is stopped. Jake watched as the facility collapsed completely around. The galaxy, billions of beings were seeing the truth broadcast. The lies could no longer stand. Jake woke in a medical facility with white walls and soft lighting that did not hurt his eyes. His body ached everywhere, but he was alive for a moment. He could not remember where he was or how he got there. Then memory flooded back, the facility collapsing, and a Shenkla emerging from the rubble and the desperate flight to safety. A figure moved beside his bed, and Princess Lyra sat in a chair looking exhausted. Her silver hair was dirty, and her armor was scratched and dented, but her violet eyes were dirty. "Alert, you are awake," she said softly. "We were not certain you would survive." Jake tried to sit up, and pain shot through his ribs. "Where are we?" "Neutral station," Princess Lyra explained. "Day space station operated by multiple races and neither human nor elven territory." She gestured around. "The only place we could come where both sides would allow us to recover." Jake looked past her, and through the window he could see the curve of a massive station structure. "How long?" "3 days," Princess Lyra answered. "You had internal injuries and broken bones, and they had to use advanced healing technology." She smiled slightly. "You will be fine, though. Humans heal remarkably fast." Jake remembered the dragon Ashen Clawsons. Lyra's expression became sad. "He is alive, but barely." She stood and gestured for Jake to follow. They placed him in a regeneration chamber. She led Jake slowly through corridors, and his legs felt weak. They reached a large medical bay, and in the center was a massive tank filled with glowing fluid. Shenkla floated inside. The dragon's eyes were closed, and his dark scales looked faded. Machines monitored his vital signs, and Jake could see the extent of his injuries. Deep cuts covered his body, and one wing looked badly damaged. "It'll take years for him to fully heal." Princess Lyra placed her hand on the tank. "He used his body to shield us when the facility collapsed, and he took wounds meant for her." Voice broke slightly. "He saved my life and yours." Jake stood beside her. "He is strong, and he will recover." Princess Lyra nodded, but tears ran down her cheeks. "He is more than my bonded dragon, Captain N. He is part of my soul. If I lost him, I do not know if I could continue." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "He is still here, and you both survive. That is what matters." They stood in silence for a while, watching the dragon's slow breathing. Finally, "Princess?" Lyra wiped her eyes. "Come, and there is something you need to see." She led him to a viewing room with a massive screen, and it played news broadcasts from across the galaxy. Jake watched in amazement. The footage Claire had broadcast was everywhere. Every major network was showing the evidence of the Memory Keeper conspiracy, the recordings from 300 years ago, the bioweapon plans, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. Riots had broken out on several elven worlds. Protests filled the streets of capital cities. Human colonies were celebrating, but there was anger too. Some humans called for revenge, and some elder races refused to believe the evidence was real. "The galaxy is tearing itself apart," Princess Lyra said quietly. "The old order is collapsing, and no one knows what will replace it." Jake watched as another broadcast showed elven officials being arrested. How many were involved? "Hundreds across multiple governments." Princess Lyra answered. "The Memory Keepers had agents everywhere, and in the military, and in diplomatic corps, and in research facilities." She changed the feed. "War crimes tribunals are being established, and it will take years to sort through everything." Jake saw his own face on the screen. He was being called a hero by some, and a traitor by others. "You are famous now, Captain," Princess Lyra said with a slight smile. "Humanity's champion who helped expose the greatest conspiracy in galactic history." She changed the feed again. "And I am called a traitor to my people." Her image appeared, and elven commentators argued about whether she was a hero or a disgrace. "There have been 3 assassination attempts against me, Artie." She said it casually, as if discussing the weather hardliners who believe I destroyed elven honor. Jake felt anger. "Rizu saved millions of lives," Princess Lyra shrugged. "Truth and honor are not the same thing to some people." Lay knock on the door interrupted them. Maya entered with Kara, and both looked tired but healthy. Captain Maya saluted. "The new Interspecies Council wants to meet with you." Jake raised an eyebrow. "New council?" Princess Lyra nodded. "They dissolved the old elven coalition and formed a joint government." She explained. "Representatives from every major race, including humans. It is chaos, but it is a start, Jake. Followed them to a conference room inside, where beings from a dozen different species elven diplomats sat beside human ambassadors dragon. Kin shared tables with representatives. From races Jake had never seen before, an older human woman approached. She had gray hair and wore a formal suited Marolisa. Chun-Chi introduced herself, commander of the human delegation. She shook Jake's hand firmly. You have done something remarkable. Captain Morris and Admiral Chen gestured to the crowded room. For the first time in recorded history, the elder races are treating humanity as equals. She paused because they have no choice anymore, and the truth you revealed proved we were victims, not aggressors. An elven man approached. He was younger than most elves Jake had seen, and his expression was earnest. Ambassador Kyle Wintersey introduced himself. I represent the reform faction of the elven government. He looked at Princess Lyra with respect. Princess Lyra and I have been working together to establish new diplomatic protocols. He turned to Jake. We want to offer you a position, Captain. The interspecies Council needs someone who both humans and elder races can trust. You would serve as humanity's Chief Representative. Jake was stunned. I am just a soldier. Admiral Chen smiled. You are the man who risked everything for truth, and that makes you exactly what we need. Princess Lyra spoke quietly. Have been appointed as the elven representative. She met Jake's eyes. We would be working together to rebuild what was broken. Jake looked around the room at beings who had been enemies. Just days ago, they were trying to build something new from the ashes of the old system. It would be difficult, and there would be setbacks, but it was worth trying. Jake nodded. I accept. The next weeks were a blur of meetings and negotiations and press conferences. Jake learned to navigate the complex politics of the Interspecies Council. He worked beside Princess Lyra, and they became partners in the difficult task of building trust between species that had been at war's low. Things began to change. Trade agreements were signed. Joint research projects were established. Cultural exchanges began. It was not perfect, and there were still incidents. A human colony was attacked by elven extremists. An elven diplomat was assassinated on Earth, but each time the new council responded with justice instead of war. One evening, Jake found Princess Lyra standing before a Shenclaw's regeneration chamber. The dragon looked better. His scales had regained some of their dark luster, and his breathing was stronger. He will wake soon, Princess, Lyra said without turning. The doctors believe another week, perhaps. Jake stood beside her. The council is working, he said. We are making progress. Princess Lyra smiled. Thanks to you, Captain, and your courage gave others courage. Jake shook his head. You are the one who investigated for 20 years, and you risked everything. Princess Lyra took his hand in. Her skin was warm now, not cold like at the banquet. We did it together, she said. Simply, that is how it should be inside the tank. Ashenclaw's eye opened slightly. The dragon's mental voice touched both their minds. Weak but clear. My heart, you have done well. Ashenclaw's presence felt warm and proud. You young human have proven yourself worthy of the truth you carry. The dragon's eye closed again. Now both of you, and the hard work is just beginning. And Princess Lyra stood together in silence. Through the window behind them, the space station slowly rotated beyond. Its stars shone in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was slowly changing. Old hatreds were being challenged. New alliances were being formed. It would take generations to fully heal the wounds of centuries, but the first steps had been taken. Jake looked at Princess Lyra and remembered the banquet where she had taken his hand. There were no empty seats, she had said, but she had made one beside her. Now they stood as equals, partners in building a future neither of them could have imagined just days ago. Princess Lyra squeezed his hand. Ready for tomorrow, Captain? There will be another difficult session, and more arguments, and more resistance to change. Jake squeezed back, ready together. They left the medical bay behind them. Ashenclaw floated peacefully in his healing chamber, though. Ancient dragon, who remembered everything now, dreamed of a future he had helped create. Future where truth mattered more than tradition, where courage could change the course of history, where an elf princess and a human captain could stand side by side, not as enemies, not even as allies, but as friends working toward something better. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.